Okay, here we are at step 5, which is the final step in the Halloween Skulls animatronic skull assembly tutorials. Okay, for this step, we're going to need a lot of stuff. So it's going to be the final step. When you're done with this step, you'll have a complete skull. And it'll be ready to go and running. So let me show you what we've got. First off, we're going to use the two HS82MG servos. And I have, to save time, I've already prepped a lot of this stuff. So I've taken the servos out of the boxes. I'm going to throw them away. They're right here. We also need the two more of the 24-tooth gears, the same gears that we used for the tilt and nod servos in the 3-axis motion tutorial. We've got all of the things that have that slide together in this one. I've already prepped by greasing all of the trenches there where these slide through, and so that part's already done just to save time in this video. So those parts go right together. They slide nice and smooth. They are already greased there and here. You've got, let's see, this is the main eye plate, the one which gives you all the hinged motion here for the eyes to move around as needed when it moves up, down, and side to side. You'll see how all that comes together. And it also comes with some separated parts. Now, most of the time when I ship these out, I already assemble this part. But if you ever had to change an eye, you would have to deal with this. So I'm going to show you how this comes apart inside the skull and how you're going to deal with that. This plate here goes on various parts of the 2-axis eye mechanism. This one here serves two purposes. One, you can see the cutout in the shape of one of these servos. You lay the servo in there. This plate holds it in place, and you screw it down. It also holds the controller card. And so that keeps that out of the way, and you'll see where that goes in a few minutes. This other plate here does the same thing. It holds, well, it doesn't hold the controller card, but it does hold the servo in place. You can see another servo cut out here. So the servos fit right in, and this plate screws over it and holds that servo in place. That's because the servos, to save space in the front of the skull where there isn't much, had to be laying down flat rather than going the other way. And there's no way really to screw them in when they're laid down that way. So I put a plate over the top of them. So that's those pieces. You've got a bunch of screws here. We've got 8 632 by 1/2. They're all 632 screws. You've got 4 632 by, let's see, what size is that? 3/4 right there. And you've got 3 632 by 1.5. And those long ones are the ones that go hold the skull together in 3 spots. So the front and the back half of the skull. That's the very last thing that you'll do. We also have the neck piece that hides all your wiring going down the neck and looks like a piece of vertebrae. And let's see, we get this little screwdriver, which you're going to need in a couple of spots. And you have the eyes that you worked on and wired up in the last section. They're all ready to go. And we also have eyeballs, as you can see in the front of this skull. They aren't mounted in there yet. They just set them in the socket so they wouldn't roll away. And we're going to pull them out and work with that later. I'll show you how that goes together. Yeah, Marty Feldman. Okay. Now, we also need just a couple of drops here and there of 3-in-1 oil. And we will need some crazy glue or super glue. That'll be all very well near the end. Okay. The main thing that I oiled is right in these spots, in here and here, and that's just because this is all 3D printed plastic and it's a little bit rough on the inside. To make it really move smoothly, I just put a couple of dabs of 3-in-1 oil. That's already prepped. That's already done here. I don't know that we'll need the oil for anything else, but it is used in this step to do that. And I think we're ready to get started. So once you've got all your servos in place, we must once again power up the controller board to center these servos. But I think the first thing that we want to do with the controller board is to set it up so we can test our lights, our LED eyes, and make sure that we've gotten that done correctly, and just leave those connected. And I'll show you where all that gets connected. And you can see a close-up right here on the screen of the controller board, ready to accept the eyes. So as you see, what I just did is I laid down the skull that I have on my stand here. By the way, if you wanted to make one of these stands for assembling the skull, it's just a piece of plywood with a 3/8 inch bolt going through the bottom, coming out the top here. And I guess this one's about an 8-inch one. You can pick them up at a hardware store. And the 3/8 inch coupler goes right over the top of the bolt. And I'm using right here a collar to hold it down. Since there's no threads in this part of this screw here, this collar holds it down tight to the plywood. That's pretty much the whole deal. It's just a bolt sticking up through a piece of plywood, and that makes a decent stand to work on. All right, so now you got this laying down here, and over here I'll use this as a pointer. We've got 4 connections on this side. This is at what's considered the bottom of the card if you're looking at the card chart, which I'll put up on the screen right here. This one here is for the white wires, and they go in together. They both go into the same hole there. And that's the anode for the LED. The next one is blue, the next one is green, and the next one is red. So if you're going in this direction, it's RGB, red, green, blue, and then your anode, your common anode. So we're going to start. The reason why we don't solder these two together and then stick them in as one wire is because you may have to remove an eye, and if you can't separate the two, it becomes a problem because you can't get they go into separate eye holes, and if you had to pull them out, you wouldn't be able to separate them. You'll understand once you see it put together. So I'm just pinching these two wires close together, and I'm going to slide them into the first space here. So the white ones are now done, and they hold in there very well. Now we're going to go with the blue wires next, which is for the blue color in the LEDs. Do the same thing, pinch them together a little bit, and put those in. And it's important that the length of bare wire that sticks out should not be long enough for you to see any bare wire outside of the connector there, as we don't want these to be able to touch each other between colors and things and screw things up. So greens are going in now, and they are in. And now the two red wires, whoops, just get those even. And there. First thing we're going to do is power up the controller board. Here we go. We're going to turn on the power, and your skull may jump because it's probably no longer in its default position. And there it goes. And now the board's powered up, so I can turn up the red. And you can see it fading up and fading back down. I can turn up the green. You make sure all 3 colors work independently. Fading up, fading down. And I can turn up the blue. And there we go. Fading up and then fading down. And then you can make whatever color you want because you can mix them. So if you wanted purple, you go a little red and blue. You can make some kind of aqua color with like green and blue. Put some more green in it, it looks more aqua. You can make really any color that's imaginable out of these. And it also has a strobe function, which will be the 4th channel in VSA, which you can also control the speed of. So I can make it flash slowly, quickly, and still mix my colors to whatever I want. Usually you don't use the strobe feature on the eyeballs, but again, this controller card is versatile and can be used for other projects that use LEDs. So that's your wiring of those boards, and I'm going to turn off the power on the controller card right now. Stand it up. And okay, now the next part is to assemble this 2-axis eye mechanism. I'm going to take the eyeballs out. We're going to be using those soon. And it's all going to happen inside of the front of the skull. And the whole mechanism attaches to these 2 points there and there. I don't know which way you can see them better. And well, let's get to it and you'll see. I'm going to assemble these external pieces to the main plate. And that's what's going to hold these eye shafts into place. You can see these little hollow pieces which allow the eye shaft to slide in and out. So we're going to work on that. And that reminds me that I did not put out, there's one more thing that I didn't put out here that we're going to need. I'll tell you about that right now, and that is the tiny springs, Gardner springs. They're in the parts list, and you're going to need 2 of those. And those are for the, to go over the eye shafts. And, okay. First of all, I'll try and show a close-up picture of the end of this, and you can see that there's a little post that sticks up right here, and then there's a hole next to it. And then you have these pieces, which fit over that. And one hole is slightly bigger than the other, and that's important because the post will go through the smaller hole, but a screw will not pass through the smaller hole. So you have to put them in the right position so that the larger hole fits over where the screw goes. And we're going to put those in position on both sides. And we can have a picture of that. And then we will take these little sleeves and place them in between. Now you can lift it off and put it in there first, and then put it down here. And now you can see that this piece moves around like that. So we just set that piece in there and down there. Okay. So now we're going to take 2 of the 632 screws that are the 1/2 inch. And with this screwdriver, we're going to try and set this right down into the threads. There we go. Now it's catching. Got it in the threads, and that can go all the way in. And it's got a lot of grip, so it's holding the screw fairly tight. I don't want to sock it down really, really tight, just because that can restrict some movement in this piece here, which is the shaft that the eye, well, a sleeve that the eye shaft goes through. So as long as that can move freely, you got it tight enough. So now we're going to do the other side. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you purchase this as a DIY kit, it's going to come assembled. This piece will come assembled for you because it only serves one purpose, being in separate pieces. I could have built it all in the same piece and printed it that way. But if you have to get the eyes out, you're going to need to remove these pieces to remove the eyes. Because what we're doing that we didn't do when we first started making these is we're now gluing the eye shafts into the eyeballs. They used to be just press fit, and that'll still work. But a lot of times when people push this in and just press it in, they'll cause tiny cracks in the eyeball parts, and they don't hold as tightly, and you run the risk of like moving your eye all the way to the side and having one of them pop out of the skull. So to solve that problem, we glue it in. But then once it's in, you can't pull this back through the back of the skull. So you have to have a way to get the eyeball out. And that's by removing these pieces. Actually, it doesn't get the eyeball out. It allows you to take this whole mechanism out of the skull the back way, and without having to remove the wires for the eyeballs. It'll all make sense as soon as we get a little further along. Okay, so now we've assembled this piece, and I'm going to put these back in place right here and here. And as I mentioned, it can only go together one way, so don't worry that you think you might have put it together wrong, because that won't happen. Okay, and this piece goes this way with the little arched piece here facing upward. See that little arch? That faces up. And if it's laying flat on the table in this manner. Okay, now we're going to attach these 2 eye servos to the controller card. And I'm going to plug the first one in right here, which is in output 5. That is your left and right servo. And this one is going to go in output 6, which is your up and down servo. And if you wanted to remember that, do I have a I don't have the right Sharpie out here. You could always just mark the cases, you know, U for up and down and R for right and left, or whatever you want to do. I can keep track of them just by following the wire back. So the left and right servo, this fits into the skull. You see these two eyelets here. They fit into the skull here and here in these two holes. So this piece is going to mount this way into the skull, and therefore this is the back, and you can see, if you look inside of here, hopefully you can see it, and again I'll take some detailed pictures. You can see the gear rack right in there. So that is going to make this one go up and down. So your up and down servo, the one that's in slot 6, is going to lay into here. This one you can also see teeth for the gear rack, and that will allow your skull to move side to side. So that's where the one from output 5 goes in there. And they'll only fit into these things one way, and I've cut a track over here for the wire to go out. But before I can lay them in there and then get ready to screw down their respective plates, we're going to have to turn the power supply back on again. And I'm also going to, for convenience, so that the board isn't hanging in midair, I'm going to lay the skull down again. So I'm going to turn on the power. Skull jumps around a little bit. We're going to lay it down. And now, get these out of the way here. Now we got the board right there, because we're going to, as part of putting these servos in, we have to mount the board as well. Okay, so now we have the two servos here. This is the left and right servo. This is the up and down servo, and we're ready to mount them down here into this. Just like we did with the 3-axis motion in the back, there's extra holes in all of these pieces. You can see one in the main piece right there. I don't know if you can see going into there. There's one here in the middle piece, and there's one here in the mounting piece. So I'm going to slide this over until I can see through these two, and then slide this over, and now you can see this screwdriver, or again a thick paper clip, or or very thin screw, anything that fits through that hole. You put them through there. Now it's aligned, so that when these are in their center position, so are the eyes, looking straight forward and right at you. So I'll just repower the board, because it's been more than 30 seconds. Everything jumps around. Now these are locked in. So again, this is the left and right servo coming out of output number 5. And I am going to put that right in here, because this is the one that goes left and right. Now I'm going to flip it over, keeping the screwdriver in place. And I'm going to take the up and down servo. I'm going to mount it right there. All right, now the up and down servo, I can put this plate right on right now. And we use the other 4, we use 4 of these 1/2-inch 632 screws. Just got to get it started. Okay. This is shaped to go on a certain way. You'll see a little angle cut in one side that matches up with the angle where the screw is right now. So you'll know it's on the right way. And basically, you should see a tiny gap all the way around the gear so that it's not rubbing on the gear. So now you're complete with the up and down portion of this. That's in place and is not going to move. And as I move this one fell out of place, which means that it's probably still exactly where it was, but just to be sure, I'm going to shut off and turn back on the power supply so that it will recenter itself if it had moved. And it did not, so I could have just put it in here, but just to be sure, I want to make sure that happens. Now comes the fun part. Now we've got to put that and this on, while at the same time mounting the controller board on. Now, when this sits in the skull, this is at the bottom. this part, swivel part here, sits at the bottom. That's where we decided that this would be the bottom of the controller board because it sits in the skull that way. So you have to, it's going to be kind of a bit of a tangle with the wires coming out all different places, and you want to make sure that they're not getting trapped underneath here, because then they could get caught in that gear. So we're going to use here the longer screws. These are the 4 3/4 inch screws. And another thing that I forgot to lay out are the nylon washers. You need 4 nylon washers, and they're going to go over your screws so that when the screw presses down on certain parts of this controller board, the metal from the screw doesn't short out anything. So we're holding those down. We slide that through. We're going to get one screw in place. I apologize for covering it with my hands while I'm working. So we're just about ready here to do some fun things. We're going to try and mount this inside the skull right now. And it's a little bit tricky because all of these wires are all going to be kind of in your way. But the power wires can just hang down, as can the wires for the eyes. They can just hang down there. These wires for the 2 servos should be actually behind these wires. Now I could feed these wires all the way through and back up to the other side, but that's kind of silly when it's easier just to unplug a servo. This is the one from position 5, and plug it back in on the other side. Get those wires out of the way. But it's hard to keep track of what's supposed to be where when it's all laying in different positions than it will be when it's finished. So let me put that one back in, and then I'm going to take out the up and down servo, position 6, do the same thing, feed it under those wires and plug it in. All right, now these wires here, there's a little gap in the board, and I like to run the wires right down inside of that gap where you can see they fit right in there, and it keeps them out of the way. And they'll pop out afterwards once you mount it in there, but it's fine. It just gives you a place to put them while you're trying to get it mounted so that it goes a little easier for you. All right, so now trying to control all of these wires at once is a little bit tricky, but we'll get it done. You don't want to catch a wire so that it's under here and gets pinched when you try and screw it in. You want it to be back here. You don't want in other words, no wire should be sitting on the top of this place. It should be back or way in back. All right, now with all that in place, I'm going to bring the top of the skull over, and we're going to try really hard to make all this reach. Okay, I've just discovered something here, and that is that I have, and this is good because this will probably happen to half the people that try and assemble it themselves, is I'd left all of this hanging down underneath the jaw, but now, except for these wires, the ones that go external, which is the 2 power wires and the 2 DMX wires, this has to be inside. All of these servo wires can't be underneath the jaw. They have to come out on the inside. So you can do that by refeeding everything, or we can just plug them, unplug them and plug them back in again. So I'm going to do that. Generally, I would have already done that ahead of time, but I forgot to do it. And I'm assuming that there are people out there who are not going to think of that and just discover that, hey, you can't put this together that way. So take them off one at a time. You can't get them mixed up. All right, now we got it. See how this, now all the wires that come out of the back are right in there, right where they're going to need to be. And we're going to mount this thing right. So back to our other position that we had this in. And again, I'll lay this down so we have more room to work. So these wires, our power wires and our DMX wires, laid back just the way that I described, are going to go facing down. And all the other wires are going to be right where they are. I'm just kind of grouping up these 2 I servo wires and holding on to them in the back there so they stay out of the way. Now I'm going to screw this in. So we're going to place this in the skull in the right position. And I'm going to use 2 more of the 1/2 inch 632 screws. And my, where's my big screwdriver? Here it is. And I'm going to screw this down into place. Things move when you touch them. So this is probably not in the same position it was before when we set the servos in there and made them in the center position. So we want to center it again now, and then you'll be able to see where these pieces line up exactly with the eyeballs. Before I do that, I'm just going to place the power wires into the slot here, and you can see a close-up of that on the screen, along with these 2 wires, the DMX wires, and they're going to go into that, I call that the trough on the bottom. And there's a little piece that you might have been wondering what it's for. That's this strange-looking piece, and that slides right down the middle of that trough and keeps those wires so that they can't come out. So now we've got everything all set. The eye mechanism is all in. We're almost done. We're so close to being done here. And you've got all your wires that go to the back of the skull coming out in one bunch. The 2 eye wires just out of the way on the side. And let's turn on the power supply and let it recenter itself. Okay, now this is centered. And we're going to turn this upwards like this. And make sure these are aligned. And what happens here is, if you had something that fit through there, not this, it's too thick, it would point straight down through the eye sockets. And maybe I can get a picture of that. And that'll allow you to see how they're lined straight, looking straight, just like it's supposed to be. And we've done this. Now, before we put this in, and you can see where these are here, this is the other place that you might need to, you may not, or you might want to put a little bit of that 3-in-1 oil where these pieces spin, and that just makes them spin just a little bit smoother. I'm going to do it here, just a drop, and we can swivel it around to the other side and do the other end. That's completely optional. It all depends on how smooth yours is moving when you put them in, and that makes it spin right around nice and smoothly. Okay, now we go to the final phase, and that is putting the eyeballs in. Now the eyeballs in these feed from the front. They don't stick, they're not attached to the back and they stick out through a hole in the skull. They feed in from the front and they can't go any further than that, so they stay right in place right there. And you can see in the back, you can see the sleeve. This is the sleeve of the eyeball there that sticks up and that the eye shafts stick into. And so you're going to basically, we'll put a spring on the eye shaft, slide it through this sleeve here and right into the eyeball. But before we do that, we have to, because as I mentioned, we're gluing these together. Now if you're making your own, you may want to try it without gluing them together, because it makes it much easier to remove this. If you have to get to the card or anything else, all you have to do is pull it back out if it's just press fit. And then you can remove the eyeball from the front and you can take this whole mechanism out and you don't have to deal with these 2 screws. But if you're afraid that, or if you crack the eye, you put a crack in here and it gets loose and your eyes are popping out when they're not supposed to be, then you might want to glue them in like I am doing now. And that means that in order to get this eye mechanism out, since you can't pull the eyeball through the skull and this is glued to it and this is part of the back, the only way to get that eyeball, to get that out, is to release it from this sleeve. And that's why you have to remove this screw here and take these pieces out. The screws are now at a 90-degree angle from what you can reach with a screwdriver. Now you can raise this all the way up and the eyes will be leaning a little bit more towards you. So what I use for that is a right angle screwdriver. Very tiny. This, either one. This is a ratchet one here. Fit it in there and you could unscrew that right in there. And then you can remove those pieces, and the eyes stay right on this piece, on this sleeve, and the eyeballs, they just sit in the skull while you remove the rest of the mechanism. That's the only way I could do it and make sure that the eyeballs never pop off for you. But again, if you're building it yourself and you want to press them in and you don't have any problems with that, then that's the easier way to go. We're going to show you how to glue them in. Now, if you're by yourself, you might want to find something that you can that will hold your eyeball for you while you get the super glue out and do a little bit of glue on there. I use that. This is just a plumber's tape spool, and the thing just happens to be the right size to put an eyeball in and keep it kind of in place. Now, all you have to do is rim the inside of that shaft. Okay, like that. Put it back in. You have to be ready to do it at the point that you're putting this in, because that's going to dry quickly. We make sure everything's lined up and centered. We take one of the eye shafts, doesn't matter which one. We put a spring on it. You can see like that. And then I slide it down through the eye sleeve and into the eyeball itself and twist it. Don't push it in too far. You still want to have a little bit of room for that spring to compress in the back. You can see about how compressed the spring is. And that'll leave you enough room. Now it's done. That eyeball's done. We're going to do the other eyeball. Put that in that spot. There we go. Okay, now you can put the whole skull together. And none of the wires are in the wrong place. So there's two wires that go on top, and I kind of stuff them in that top section. And there's the two wires that go to the bottom, which one of them is the tilt servo and the other is the jaw servo. When they're all kind of in place, you can see where the skull fits together. It's got little, oh, we got to fix this. There we go. That one started to pop out. Okay. That was the 3-axis plate just moving around in there before the skull was put together. So now I'm just going to put this together, and you can see there is like a peg that fits into a hole on the other side, and that aligns the skull and makes sure that it stays in the right place. There it is. And finally, we put our 3 screws into the back. And there you go, that is the finished product. So I'm going to power it back up, reconnect all the connections, and run a routine on it. And you'll see that in just a second. Okay, we're back. And it's time to show you what it does. We just hooked it back up, ran a VSA routine, and this is what it does. This is the one that comes with the skull. It's called House Rules.
Good evening, foolish mortals. Your greatest fears await you beyond these doors. Before entering inside, you must understand some rules. No smoking, weapons, or alcohol permitted at any time. No cell phone or flashlight use is allowed inside. Do not touch any actors or props, and you will not be touched. No running, horseplay, fooling around, or swearing. Enter at your own risk. And remember, in darkness, they hunt the living. Obey these rules or die!
Okay, calm down now. Go back to sleep. Alright, that wraps up this tutorial series on the Halloween Skulls animatronic skull assemblies. And this is the last part, and as you can see, it is completed and ready to go. The only thing left to do is to slide all the wires through the neck piece, and before you mount this, that will cover the rod and hide all the wires, and then you mount this on a skeleton.